Berber rugs are traditionally made from either wool or yarn salvaged from old sweaters or whatever they can find, even cloth strips. They use simple rug looms that are made from a lot of things they can find here and there. Some rugs are made with high pile knots, and some are made with a simple weave. You can also use a different style of loom that is more convenient if you have someone who can make you one. We begin the process by making a set of stronger cords, slightly larger, by twisting the two sides of these triple threads together. First we twist one way, and then we put the two sides together and twist in the opposite direction. We make 2 sets of these cords. Because we are not working out of doors, we cannot hammer these pegs, these metal pegs, into the ground. So we've upturned table legs and are using them instead to support the post as we wrap the warp. These cords that we initially twisted, they're folded in half and tied around the bottom of these posts. The ends are balled up, wound up to contain them so that they're not constantly in the way. One person is at each end of the warp, webbing as it grows, wrapping each twist as a third person brings it around. Each round, each wrap is twisted into that double cord that we initially made and then tied to the bottom of these posts. The twist is very important. The twist is what keeps each thread secure in its place in relation to the others. Without the twist, they slide freely along, and it makes for an impossible webbing. When the webbing is finished, each thread is by itself in its own twist, except for the edges, which are in sets of 3. This will be the selvage of the rug. Before you remove it from the posts that are strapped to the table legs, it is very important to make sure you put a rod or a post or a board or something in between the 2 halves of the webbing so that they don't get mixed up as you begin to manipulate the thing as a whole. Next, one end of the webbing needs to be fastened securely and stretched very tightly against the bottom part of your loom. In this old one, it's this flat board that's bored with holes through which you can stretch it and tighten it. Then a string is passed through that initial cord and through the holes in the board all along the way so that the whole thing is nice and tight. Then you stretch the other end of the warp webbing across the upper part of the loom and fasten it down as well as you can with just wrapping and tying it around the board. The twist in those original cords then is what keeps each vertical thread in its position next to the others. Again, I will reiterate that it is very important to keep both sides of the webbing separated. In this case, we have these two rods. On the other end, we place a second board against the first board, as you see us doing. This prevents the webbing from twisting on the first board as we wrap it up. This will be the part we unroll as we work, as we wrap from the bottom, the finished rug from the bottom. This old-fashioned version of the loom requires lots of different strings and ropes to connect it all together. Then the bottom needs to be tightened using the same pegs we used to wrap the warp initially. And if you didn't get it quite right, you have to untie all the ropes and raise the top board again, because it does need to be uniformly tight all the way across the bottom. Now we're preparing to wrap the leashes. This front bar that's tied across the loom is called the leash bar. And the smaller cane is just going to be pushed up out of the way without being taken out. And the larger one, that's the same size as the leash bar, is fastened against the leash bar, but behind it, in between the two sides of warp. Then we tie a string across the front of the leash bar, and we tie the leash string onto that string across the front. At this point, we begin wrapping. The first sets are in sets of 3, and then it's 1, 1, 1. I'll show it in slow motion. Over and around, under and back and front. The loop gets put below that horizontal thread and the ball is brought up through it. I check from the bottom to make sure that each thread is coming up in the appropriate order and is not twisted. Moving one at a time across the face and across the back of the warp webbing. Loop goes under the thread and then the ball comes up through. When the leashes are all tied, we can disconnect the rod that's in the back. That horizontal thread stays there, but it gets fastened to the leash bar by itself. And the rod in the back that was there for spacing can now be pushed out of the way. In this old setup, that bar that we just took out gets placed against the loom at an angle and tied to the leash bar to pull it away, to put some tension on the leash bar. Some people tie it behind the leash bar, some tie it in front. As long as there's a bit of tension, you can do it either way. Thanks to my husband and the carpenter up the street, I have now a new loom that is much easier to work with. I can work at it sitting, And it doesn't require me to disassemble the entire loom every time I want to turn it. The rug is worked by turning the worked portion up around the bottom board, in this case the bottom barrel, and pulling down more weft from the upper level. My husband designed it with ratchets so that it's easy to turn and easy to tighten. It works beautifully. On this new loom, I don't have to tighten the warp webbing into the board with a thread. We slip it over a small board like this that gets screwed directly into that drum. And that, my friends, is how to set up a traditional Berber rug loom. Next, I'll show you how to weave.